Hello everyone, this is Robert from Book of Mormon Editions, where we discuss printings, publications, and various editions of the Book of Mormon. So I'd like to go off on a little tangent and have some fun today, as the next edition of the Book of Mormon that we'll review is a little out of the ordinary. I was also asked about rare editions of the Book of Mormon, so I decided to research this edition because I think it's significant, unique, and a bit of a unicorn for me. So we'll discuss the 1899 book called The Nephite Records by the Church of Christ, sometimes nicknamed as the Whitmerite Church, and most of us probably haven't heard of it. I say this book is a little bit of a unicorn because I know this edition exists, but I have yet to see one personally. The images for this episode comes from online sources and archives. We'll still review this edition as it has influence on some of the editions that we'll review later on. As a background to this, and as a review of church history, Oliver Cowdery was good friends with David Whitmer, and the Whitmers were the ones who introduced Oliver to Joseph Smith. Oliver and David, along with Martin Harris, became the three witnesses to the gold plates of the Book of Mormon. As the church continued onward, Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer were assigned to western Missouri, where they started purchasing land for the church. Long story short, there were some disputes between the Whitmers and the church in determining who owned these lands, and the Whitmer family, along with Oliver Cowdery, left the church in the late 1830s. The silver lining around this was that both Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer remained faithful to their testimony of the Book of Mormon. In years later, Oliver Cowdery reconciled with the Salt Lake group and requested to rejoin them. However, he died before he could make the trek to Salt Lake. Throughout his life, Oliver Cowdery was in possession of the printer's manuscript of the Book of Mormon. When he died, it passed into the hands of the Whitmer family. David Whitmer remained in Missouri all his life and organized a church called the Church of Christ in the 1870s. This group called themselves the Whitmerites. He also wrote several pamphlets reconfirming his experience and his testimony of the Book of Mormon. One of the highlights of this Church of Christ was that they used the printer's manuscript to publish their own edition of the Book of Mormon and titled it as the Nephite Records. To wrap up, the Whitmerite Church of Christ eventually dwindled out and many members moved over to the Temple Lot Church of Christ, but the book called the Nephite Records remains as their legacy. So some of the details on this Nephite Records. Rather than confuse the book with the Salt Lake or reorganized versions of the Book of Mormon, the Whitmerite group used a phrase found in Revelations given to Joseph Smith describing the Book of Mormon as the record of the Nephites. So the Nephite Records was published in 1899 in Richmond, Missouri, printed as a hardback with a cloth cover. The spine shows the title, and the front and back cover are blank. The inside cover page lists the title, gives the title paragraphs, and lists the publisher as the Church of Christ with a printing date of 1899. After the cover page comes the testimony of the witnesses, followed by 9 pages of contents listing key items and stories. And then afterwards comes the first book of Nephi, which included the header and text. Interestingly, instead of reformatting this edition, the Church of Christ used the versing style of the Salt Lake printings. Orson Pratt created the first set of verses for the Salt Lake version in the 1870s, and it seems that the Church of Christ used this set of versing's over 20 years later rather than try to reassign verses. The volume ends on page 721 with no index or supplemental material. So I've seen this edition listed on eBay a while back, but it was a little out of my budget. So I'm impressed that the Salt Lake Church Archives gave the image to archive.org, and I'll list the link to the archive.org website in the description below. There's a few reasons why we're reviewing this online archived edition of the Book of Mormon. First, that this 1899 edition was the first to use the printer's manuscript as a source of text, and that other religious organizations have then used this printing as their source for their own Book of Mormon printing. We'll review these in the future. Second, if any of you who watch this video actually have a copy of the Nephite Records, I'd give a right arm as collateral for me to actually see a copy to review the real thing. Third, researching this edition gave me an increased appreciation of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon. David Whitmer lived to an old age, and he was constantly asked about his experiences. He never wavered on his love and testimony of the Book of Mormon. I hope that you've gained a little insight on the Book of Mormon in general, the life of David Whitmer, and this archived edition of the Nephite Records. Thanks for watching this video. I appreciate the feedback I've been getting on these videos and hope to continue with it. If you have a specific or unique edition of the Book of Mormon that you'd like reviewed on this series, please contact me at bomeditions@gmail.com. Be safe and healthy, everyone.